happy to be here. I'm dialing in from New Zealand, so I literally just woke up an hour ago. That also means that I pretty much missed everything that happened before, so I'll need to catch up on that once the videos are online. So our next speaker to join us is David Borczuk. David is a senior clinical data analyst at Alchemira's pharmaceutical company based out of Waltham, Massachusetts. He's passionate about design and user experience when it comes to data visualization and visual storytelling. And when he's not building Tableau visualization, Dave loves to play board games and cook. So welcome, Dave. You'll talk to us about the power of deliberate design and data storytelling. So over to you, and yeah, let's go. We can't hear you right now. So there seems to be a problem with his sound. He's not on mute. You want to check in the settings if you set up the right headset?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes. All right.
that little second of horror there.
No horror. I got it. Okay,
Sweet.
let me reshare my
go.
screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hello data fam. Nice to be back presenting. Today I'm going to be presenting about something called deliberate design. Something that I've kind of evolved over the past couple weeks ever since the Tableau conference, where I did a lot of brain dates and I kind of explained this concept to a few of some of the brain dates that I had. I kind of wanted to take it up to the next level. So just a little bit about me. My name is David Borczuk. I am a Tableau Public Ambassador. I have 5 visited days, and I love Tableau and I love the data fam, but I also really, really love McDonald's, and it's a real close race between Tableau and me looking at those chicken nuggets. And I'm super excited to be talking to you guys. And the main point of this presentation is almost has nothing to do with Tableau, which is pretty funny and ironic, but the main thing, oh yeah, here are some of my visualizations that I've created. And as you can see, I do a lot of long form visualizations. I've kind of experimented with a few different design styles, and I've kind of seen an evolution in myself, which is kind of exciting. But back to what I was saying, the topic that I want to discuss has nothing to do with Tableau. It's actually that we are busy people and we are always doing different things. We're catching up on work. We're going on Facebook at the same time as catching up on work. Maybe we're playing a little World of Warcraft or Call of Duty on the side and going on Tableau Public, also on our phones on Instagram. And the reason why this is so important is because social media has kind of cultivated a lack of attention that we have to things. We're constantly consuming data. And with the information age that we're in, data is moving so fast that we only have enough time to consume data only little bits at a time, or else either we lose attention, or we kind of get decision fatigue and we get frustrated with what we're looking at. So if you take anything away from this, it's the obvious claim that we are busy people, and you need to think of that very, very particularly. So Microsoft published a survey that said that our attention span is around 8 seconds compared to a goldfish's attention span that's around 9 seconds. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard something like this before. But the reason why this is so important is because that 8 seconds is extremely critical in order to get your insights from a data visualization point of view as fast as possible. And all of the social media that we consume probably is shortening our attention span a lot. So also keep this in mind, that we are not only busy people, but we are busy people with 8 seconds of attention span on average. I'm sure my attention span is more like 5 seconds, but to each their own, I guess. This is a little blurry, but there was a headline that said how 1 second could cost Amazon $1.6 billion in sales. If there was a famous human-computer interaction study that kind of showed the amount of time that a user of a computer should be interacting with the interface. And this kind of talks about how time is money, and 1 second could cost a major company so much money. And Amazon's a massive, retailer of products. They're a huge online presence. And if you're searching around and you're trying to click a link to see what you would be interested in, and it takes too long, you might just give up and not even pursue that link. So again, time is money. We're busy people. We have 8 seconds to consume all the data and insights that we can. And this is a real big challenge when designing visualizations for Tableau Public or for visualizations at work, et cetera. Think that you only have this 8 seconds to work with, which is kind of scary, but that's kind of the point of my presentation. How do we tell this story in around 8 seconds? And I see this as a continuum where you can focus on two ends. You can focus on the user experience of the viz, or you could focus on the complexity of the viz more. Now, not to say that these are two important parts of it, but looking at visualizations that we see on Tableau Public, or looking at visualizations that might not show the best design practices, you don't want it to be too complex, or else it's going to take me longer than 8 seconds to figure out what you're trying to talk about. I might get tired of it. I might go on Instagram instead. These like brutal realizations that we have to kind of own up to and admit that this is like an actual reality. Or you could focus on the user experience of the biz and maximize the user experience, but then you also kind of want that complexity in there too. So I feel like it's a moving line. It's fluid. I like to focus on user experience, and the way that I do that to maximize my design is to make sure that every single design decision, it matters. If you ask me, David, why did you put this text in this part of the visualization? I can give you an answer to that. And I think people need to cognitively and deliberately figure out why they're doing something, why they're putting this design element in their visualization, why they're adding this circle here, why they're adding this title here. It shouldn't be something that's unconscious. It should be something that you are constantly thinking about, and it's something you have to practice and get used to it. It takes a little discipline to kind of say, well, I can sit here for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to put this title in the right spot. But in the end, when you iterate through all these designs, you'll eventually come to a sweet spot, and you'll be proud of the time that it took for you to do something like that. So when I'm designing something, there are kind of 3 questions that I consider here. One, does the design element have good alignment and contrast? Those are like the most basic design principles you want to look at. If there's too much contrast, there's not enough contrast, it's going to be hard to see a lot of the elements, but you also want to make sure there's contrast in everything. Think about when you eat food. If you have good contrast between salty, savory, sweet, and spicy, that's a cohesive taste palette, and it's good. You'll like something like that. So there's contrast in every single type of design. It could be, and it's haptic. There's so many different ways that you can do that. And then how long will it take for the viewer to interpret the element that I'm considering? This is probably the most important. I have to really think to myself, if I put this visualization in, I have to basically say, well, will this take 3 seconds, 4 seconds away from the 8 seconds that the person's going to have? Or will it be like 1 or 2 seconds? So I have like more time to put other things in. And then 3, what is the purpose of this design element? Am I building aesthetics, or am I building actually like my data visualization and like the content and my insights? So when you kind of boil all these into one pot and melt it all together, the solution is you want to keep it as simple as possible. And a lot of the comments that I get on the visualizations that I create is that I use very simple chart types. My analyses are really simple. And sometimes if you think that, you're going to be, you might think that your design is overly simplistic, is not like, you're not flexing your Tableau muscles as much, you're not flexing your design muscles as much. But in the end, when your viewers are looking at the visualization that you've created, they're actually getting the insights that you're trying to portray and communicate to them. And that's the goal. That's why we're visualization designers. That's our core purpose. That's what separates a data visualization designer from someone who is not a data visualization designer. How quickly can you get the insights from your brain to their brain? And that's very, very important. So we're not going to be like this pug. We're not going to be sad. We're going to be happy because I'm going to prove some very simple ways that you can augment your design without going too complicated. Okay. I'm going to spend the most time on this because it's kind of like, it was kind of the paradigm shift in the way that I learned to design things. And for those who don't have tiled views, people who have tiled views on their visualization are going to be able to get away with this a lot because everything is kind of aligned more or less. But for people who float, like me, I'm team float. Whenever you build your visualization, use the major design elements that you put in as anchors for alignment for other design elements. And you'll realize when you start putting things together and floating things on top of each other, if you either use your grid line, or what I do is actually draw grid lines in Tableau or Figma, the software that I use outside of Tableau, you'll see how things look good together when they're aligned to each other in whatever space that they're in. So right here, I have this like random 0, 1 on the left side, and then you have the kind of the insight here, and then a random feature. It kind of looks like a website, but I drew these lines so that they would kind of build this random abstract figure on the bottom. And if you take away the lines, it just looks okay. Like it doesn't look like there's in disarray. There's no chaos. Everything is aligned. And all I did was take the elements. Let me see if I can go back. I took, feature 2 had a line here, and there was a line here from the edge of this square, like the green square in the bottom left, that kind of made the space for the blue square. And then feature 3 had a line that I aligned the other green square with. And you can kind of just like keep building and building and building. And you'll see that even if you're trying to like put elements in random places, as long as you follow and you keep building these grid lines, things will pretty much come together. You don't want to make too many grid lines or else then there'll be chaos. But like having, the main element be that anchor for the rest of the elements that you have or sub elements that you have, really, really take your design and clean it up. It's a pretty full, it's something that I hadn't done. And then all of a sudden I started doing it. I'm like, wow, my workflow was just sped up so much now that I had the ability to just draw grid lines and just anchor everything off of 4 or 5 elements. So that's that. And also, I'm going to keep this pretty quick presentation. If any of you have questions, I can definitely elaborate, during the question and answer phase or offline. Okay, second thing, and I see this a lot on Tableau Public. People are not using typography to their advantage. Remember, it is about the visualization, but you also need to consider that information design is creating also a narrative around the visualization that you're creating. And our next best friend that is not our chart is our typography. And having powerful, big typography that's bold will be able to grab the attention of the reader really quickly. And you can use different levels of typography to accentuate different elements. But I see a lot of people who don't have, unless you have a major visualization that tells its own story, people, I feel like, misuse typography and don't take advantage of it as much as they could. And insights sometimes get lost due to lack of hierarchy or having typography that is weak and not eye-catching. So I feel like you can really, really use typography well. Go on Google Fonts, download some cool popular fonts, save it as an image file on PowerPoint or Figma or Adobe, and then export it as a file, as an image file in Tableau, and you can put that wherever you want as long as you're floating. Well, you can also not float it, but Again, use good typography. It's super important. Also, kind of along with typography, use powerful colors, bright colors. Look at my face right now. It's red from how powerful the pink is on the screen. Make good contrast between the typography that you have and the colors that you have. And you'll be able to just instantly elevate your viz and the narrative behind your viz, because the contrast is so bold and eye-catching. And I would just say play around with it and see what you can do. If you look at some of my most recent vizzes, they're very like bold colors with white text on the background, and I've found that that's really helpful. Sometimes, although, if you look at it too long, like right now, I'm looking at this for a long time, and I'm sure a lot of you are, your eyes are starting to hurt. So you kind of have to balance the amount of attention that you're going to have someone put on this. Okay. So another really important one is our job as data visualization designers is not to only create visualizations that summarize all of the insights that we're trying to do, but we also want to accompany that with narrative that also summarizes our data visualization. Because what ends up happening is you need to have a data visualization that shows the insights as calculated as you can, so that I'm not spending time calculating or reasoning through everything in my head. To make that even easier, you can actually spell it out for the viewer right next to the visualization. So here you see summarize your insights in single sentence statements. And then if your visualization next to it is an elaboration on that, I can understand it. I don't even have to think about the visualization and how to encode all the different elements if it's a complex visualization, because when it comes down to it, I would have spent 1 second looking at the insights, and it will allow me to spend less time figuring out what the chart is trying to say, which gives me more time to look at other visual components of my viz. So I wrote, you can use subheadings to provide more details about your visualization, but don't assume that your end user is actually going to read it. When you look through an abstract, I know in grad school, and I was a biology major in undergrad, I had to read so many different abstracts. You better believe I did not read each single paper that I had to review. I read the abstract and the headers of the subheadings, so that I could get all the main ideas. And the reason why that was so effective is because there's actually a standard where you try to publish the insights on all the subheadings, so that people who go through all these abstracts and papers understand what you're talking about in the paper without having to read through the whole paper. So I feel like that is a very, very powerful way of portraying your insights. And I feel like that's something that should be conserved in data visualization design, where you have your narrative that has that major insight on top. So that's what I usually do. I'll go through an example in a few minutes. Also, use a simple structure with your viz. Try to make sure that when you're creating, if you create a long form visualization, this is where I feel like it's most important. When a lot of your data is scattered and difficult to kind of understand, if you have a simple structure, at least it's easier for someone to figure out the pattern of your design. And when they're looking at one thing and they're looking at another visualization, if you repeat that again, I don't have to spend as much time trying to figure out where everything is and what legend is belonging to which, because I saw it above the second visualization. So in the example I have here, yeah, I have a cool title on top, and then you have the narrative on the left, and then the visualization on the right. And then in the middle, I just switch it. So you have the narrative on the right and the visualization on the left. But then I continue the pattern before, where again, I have the narrative on the left and the visualization on the right. And if I keep alternating between those, you're going to expect that the following visualization is going to have what the other one didn't have. The reason why I would alternate this is to kind of give a little more flow to my visualization. If it was all on one side, it kind of is a little boring. So you kind of want the eye to go from one part to the other, so that it's not just, you're not just like lazily scanning the entire document. So that's why I would alternate them. The last but not least, and this is also extremely important that I feel like a lot of people don't do, although I have been seeing it a little bit more on Tableau Public, don't hesitate to ask for feedback. That's actually going to be your step where you're able to see if all of the elements that you chose for the visualization and all the design decisions that you chose for your visualization is correct. If you have someone go through the visualization and you ask them, well, how long did it take for you to go through it? And they said 30 seconds, that's a long time. Will all of your viewers look at it for 30 seconds? Will your insights be communicated in 30 seconds, or can you do it in less time? I imagine you would ask feedback for a few people. Then you can ask other questions like, is the design cohesive? Is my design user friendly, and all that stuff? And the more feedback you're going to get, the better it's going to be. And the more the variety of people who you ask is also going to be really helpful. If you know a friend who's colorblind and you give this to them, they might not be able to tell you any of the insights because you haven't used or color accessible colors. There are a lot of tools online that allow you to like put an overlay to see if your visualization is colorblind friendly. But a lot of the accessibility issues that you see in some visualizations are because you don't have proper feedback. And I mean, even I don't always ask for feedback when I'm trying to come up with some visualizations, and something I need to work on more. And I feel like a lot of improvement for myself can be made by just asking someone, what do you think of the way I've formatted this? So again, once you have all of the visualization components and all the design decisions that you've made throughout your viz, cap it off with some good feedback and maybe iterate it once or twice, and then you're in a really good spot. So I kind of want to go over my rideshare travel in New York City viz, because that was kind of the first viz that I used these principles in. And I'm going to go through each section a little bit and explain the parts that resonate with what I've just been talking about. So the title here is Rideshare Travel in New York City. It's a little hard to see, but I have like little cars on the right side to try to subliminally connect the idea of taxis and rideshare to the end user. And again, this is almost the size of the viz, huge font. Boom, you see the title, and the color choice is very bold, and it gets a little hard to look at, I'm sorry. But if you're scanning through it for 8 seconds or 9 seconds, you don't have to really deal with that. And that's kind of the purpose. That's how I designed it. So you have the data sources and disclaimer on top. You have why I designed the visualization. Excuse me, my credits that I designed it on the top right. And you can actually see that I use these grid lines as aesthetic elements as well. So I aligned the main grid line to the T of travel, because I felt that was kind of the most important. It didn't look right when the T was off of that grid line. And the R and the N align well. So I kind of just wanted to make sure that the T was aligned. The next section, I wanted to talk about the 3 big things I was going to be talking about in my viz. Again, these are huge. Like, you see the 3 components that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about yellow taxis, for-hire vehicles, and green taxis. You don't even have to read the stuff under it if you don't want to, but I just wanted the end user to understand that these are the 3 things I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so the next section, I have this statement for insights. Uber and Lyft has dominated the rideshare market. So if you take your hand, you cover the graph on the right, you already understand what I'm about to show you. And the graph should be should basically explain what I said on the left, but elaborate a little more. So now you're able to see within context that, the yellow taxi it looks like it has seasonal trips, seasonal increases of trips over time, or monthly increases of trips over time. Green taxis don't seem very popular, but then all of a sudden these for-hire vehicles like Uber and Lyft, boom. So again, you don't have to read this subheading, but I kind of just, in case you have the time to read everything, I've given you the full package here, and you're actually able to interact with the buttons on the bottom to show how the for-hire vehicles have changed between Uber and Lyft, and the fact that Uber has dominated the market. So the way that I set this up was kind of make sure that I'm highlighting the for hire vehicles here. And I thought about putting the yellow for yellow taxi and green for green taxi, but I thought that the contrast wasn't good enough. I wanted to really highlight the for hire vehicle section here. So I grayed out everything and made sure that you understood what I was going to be talking about with Uber and Lyft, because the next section, I don't know if I show it. No, I don't show it. But if you actually look on the left here, I show that COVID-19 has disrupted it, and you see the graph of the for hire vehicles, and then it just tanks during lockdown. I do explain the rideshare heat map here of Manhattan and how it has gone dark in April of 2020, and how you can see the different levels of activity based on the area in Manhattan and how it doesn't exist anymore. Again, I have the insights on top and the graphs to explain it on the bottom. Everything is, as you can see, everything is aligned. I don't know what anchor point I used for this one, but I imagine there's a grid line that I drew all the way up to the top. So that's that. And then, I talk about other things in between, but it's just a repeat. If you actually look at the structure, I have narrative on the left here, narrative on the left, and then something in the middle, and then narrative on the right, narrative on the right. So I create a balance between the way that the visualization is portrayed, but I also created, and then thereby creating symmetry, but I also created a flow where your eyes aren't stuck in one part of the visualization. And I created a neutral point in the middle so that you can kind of it's like a eye palette cleanser, so that you don't have to spend too much time, trying to go from here to here and understanding, well, why did he change? You go from a neutral point to the other side. So finally, what I really like to do is add a conclusion. So if you skipped all the in-between part and you still need to get to the end of the viz, I have a statement that answers the main point of the entire viz, which is that it has crashed, but bike sharing actually started to become a viable alternative. I didn't show that part, but I show how there's been an increase in bike sharing ever since lockdown. So that's generally how I designed it. So you start, if I go back. So I started a big title, talk about the things that I wanted to talk about. Most important point right up front, and next to it, little supporting information to try to tell the story, and then a conclusion. And each section has that insight, subheading, graph, and then the conclusion at the end. And so that's kind of how I use deliberate design to tell a story. I've kind of come up with my own little formula on how to do it. And creating, all the elements are anchored off of each other. Everything is a margin that's clear. Any little picture that I put on the side are aligned with something that already existed on the dashboard. And once you do that, I dare you just to play around with it. You'll see how things start to come together. So in general, the takeaways: 1, always think how your designs are adding and subtracting time from the viewer experience. If you're thinking deliberately and consciously about that, your designs and your visualizations will end up looking a lot cleaner and showing the insights in a much more powerful way. Number 2, maximize your insights by complementing your visits with powerful typography and alignment. Like I said, typography is going to be your next best friend when you don't have you're not necessarily working on your visualization. We are creatures of language. We have visual language and we have written language. So make sure that your written language is as important as your visual language if you decide to include it as a prominent component of your visualization. Now, granted, if you're building a business dashboard, you might not have as much narrative in there. So that's also something to consider as well. I'm kind of a little biased because I do a lot of my visualizations for client work. I do some stuff for my own company that kind of follows this as well. but I don't make as many business dashboards. So definitely biased towards kind of like the long form visualization where you have a data storytelling narrative behind it. And then finally, number 3, ask others for feedback. That's going to be the biggest way that you're going to be iterating and improving on the designs that you've already created. And I apologize that the takeaways here is not aligned correctly. The pitch deck somehow didn't work with some of the alignment after I was exporting it. But that's pretty much it. I wanted to be kind of an easy, quick presentation. I wanted to practice what I preached, didn't want to take too much of your time. And I'm happy to answer any questions either now or offline or on Twitter. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I don't have a YouTube. You can't hit any like buttons or subscribe, but definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any questions about my presentation. Thank you so much.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, I think that was super interesting. I know for myself, I try to do that sort of conscious design thing, but I know that especially for the font and for your like the one sentence summary thing, that's stuff I barely ever do and I should be doing. So yeah, that's a really good reminder. And looking through the chat, there were lots of people who said sort of similar things. So it was like really, really interesting to see what you pay attention to, because there was also quite a bit of praise for your work and your dashboards. So we do have a couple of questions. I start with Sedal first, and he asked, how do you make particularly the design choices, for example, why purple gradient for the Rideshare Travel?
So when I choose colors for my visualizations, I do experiment with the contrast of them too, but I also have to keep in mind what the colors actually mean. And so purple is usually a cool color to use because it kind of represents security and knowledge and stuff like that. So I see a lot of people using purple, and I think it doesn't necessarily resonate with the taxis, but I did know that yellow generally contrasts well with purple. And so if I wanted yellow to be an accent, which was relative to the yellow taxi, I feel like when you think of taxis, you think yellow. If I made yellow the primary background, then it's going to be really hard to add contrast the other way around. And so I made a more neutral background to be purple and accented with yellow. And that kind of allowed me to bring that theme forward a little bit. But yeah, good question.
That's talking about considerate decisions. That's a whole lot of considerations there for a
Yeah.
background color. That's pretty cool. Then we have another question. Well, sort of 2 or 3 questions that sort of go into the same direction. So can you tell me some good starting point to develop design skills and any suggestion on which fonts to use? Because all the fonts you're using are awesome. And somebody else also asked, how do you decide which fonts to be added to your dashboard?
Yeah. The fonts are going to be entirely up to you. I like certain fonts because I like the way that they look, but you might like fonts the way that you like to look. In general, a good way to think about it is have a pretty neutral font. And the only time I actively think between fonts is, do I want it to be serifed? So the fonts, this is the font that for thank you is a sans serif. It doesn't have like the little, well, they're called serifs, but like little notches at the end of the the font elements. If you want it to be like fancy, maybe you want to use a serif font. If you want it to be modern, use a sans serif font. That's kind of how I do it. But generally, I find that sans serif fonts are better for headers because they're kind of more monotone and easier to decode letters. And serif fonts are usually good for subheadings because we're used to reading serif fonts when we read books, and we're also used to Times New Roman as like our standard font growing up. So I usually just kind of decide what font type style that I want to use. In terms of where I get my fonts, a lot of my fonts are Google fonts. There are Adobe fonts too that you can use, but you have to have a Creative Cloud license. But Google fonts are all free. And you can actually just go onto Google and look at the top most popular fonts. And that's probably going to be your best bet for serif and sans serif fonts, because the popular ones are going to be the ones that people use the most and who are going to be if more people are using it, more people are reading it. And so it's going to be more easily understood if you're using fonts that are popular, because they're going to be present on more websites, more people read the websites, and they can kind of recognize the font more quickly. But really, it's up to your own preference. Just make sure that the font's readable. And also the font family has a lot of different variations to it. You want to have semi-bold, bold, black, extra bold. You can have thin, you can have regular, medium. There's like 100 different ways and font weights that you can use. And if there's a font family that has a lot of good font weights, I would use that too.
Cool. That also directly answered the next question,
Yeah.
which was introduced with that it's a bit of a pineapple on pizza discussion, sans serif or serif and data visualization. And I think you covered that very well.
Yeah, I have examples for both. I have ones where I use Merriweather as my header, which is a good serif font, and then this is Gilroy. So take a look at some of my past visualizations I've created, and you can look at, there's use cases for both that I have.
Cool. One question about how you work between Tableau and Figma. So how exactly do you design it on Figma and then add visuals in Tableau? How does that work for you? And is that a long process for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a very common question that people ask. It really depends on my project. Sometimes I actually create the entire background visualization on Figma and export it as a single image. But sometimes I've found that Tableau renders it kind of weird if it's an entire image. But I definitely wireframe and design everything in Figma, and then either export image assets into Tableau or use the wireframe to kind of build all my information that I'm going to be using in Tableau. I feel like Figma just gives a lot of freedom to prototyping and wireframing, and it's easy. My workflow is the fastest using Figma. Like creating those grid lines are way faster in Figma. You can do it in Tableau, but you have to create like a blank floated object and then make the width or height 1 and then make it black and then align it. I can do that a lot faster in Figma. So definitely all my wireframing is going in Figma, and I do spend a while wireframing before I actually do anything in Tableau, because it allows me to kind of see what fits. But I do have all my data prep. I've done the data prep and I've done all the data analysis in Tableau first. And then knowing that, I need to generate, how am I going to present these insights? And I go to Figma, do that stuff, and then bring it back into Tableau.
Cool. And then one more question, because we still have a bit of time. Because you talk about conscious designing and conscious decision making, how does that work in your process? Is that while you do everything, you take all your decisions, or do you do a bunch of things and then start laying them out and do a whole lot of decision at once and go back and change things if they don't work?
Yeah, so there's like, I'll have like a writer's block sometimes where I'm trying to design something and I'm just like stuck. And then once I have the header section, I usually start the header section. And the header section is where I generate all my anchors, so the rest of my visualization. And so I create this big title about what I'm talking about, and that kind of gets the gears going. I don't have this master plan where I'm like, boom, this is my design, like I got it. That's hard to do. I do little bits by little bit. So I'll create something, I'll throw it on the screen, work with it for about half an hour, leave for a day, come back and look at it, because that's also really helpful that I didn't mention. But if you look at a design and you build it and you're working on it for 2 hours, you're going to become very biased to your design and keep going. But if you leave and come back, 8 times out of 10, I will not like what I just did. So see if it passes that test, and then work on it a little more. See if everything is aligning with what you're trying to tell. Maybe the way that you're designing is changing the way you want to show the data. Maybe you're trying to tell a story that seems to be more accurate depending on how you're building your design. It's definitely, you're talking between Tableau and your Figma or whatever design on the outside. I wouldn't feature creep too much. I'm not sure that's the right word, but I would kind of have your thesis statement, at least. Think of it like a 5-paragraph essay. You have a main statement, and you need to abide by that statement. And all your supporting arguments can change, and the way that you present those supporting arguments can change, but make sure you stay true to your original argument, which I feel like should always be resonating with your viz. So that if anything, if I don't even look at your viz and I read the title and like glance over your chart and like look at a few tooltips, I will still understand what your viz is talking about after 4 seconds or 5 seconds.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's great advice and a great summary of how to design and how to create visualizations. So that's it with questions from the community. Thanks so much for talking about your process and your experience and sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me.
No, you're very welcome. And next up we have Rod